Okay. My name's Vito. I'm 57 years old. I was born in St. Louis. I didn't really, when I was a little kid, nobody in my family was really crazy for dogs or cats or anything. My parents were kind of neat freaks, so they liked animals, but they thought they belonged on a farm or somebody else should own them. But I guess, I don't know how I did it, but somehow when I was 9 years old, I guilted my dad into getting me a dog. And it was well, we don't know exactly what it was. They said it was a Beagle Terrier, but it definitely was a pit bull, probably mixed with Beagle.
Right.
And she was little. She was probably 34 pounds, something like that. And we lived in a neighborhood where you couldn't put up a fence. Everybody had a lot of land, but everybody just spayed and neutered their dogs, and they just, ran in the neighborhood. It was a dead-end neighborhood. So anyway, I had to keep her on a chain because she would whip other dogs and stuff. But anyway, she lived to be 18 years old.
Wow.
I had to stop and ask my parents that. I'm like, are you sure? But yeah, when I was 27, they called me and said, hey, Maddie's not doing so great, and which she hadn't done very great for a long time. She was kind of blind and couldn't hear anything. So anyway, I took her to the vet, and the vet's like, she's got a strong heart. Why do you want to put her down? And I thought, oh, my God,
wow.
I guess I'm crazy. So he said, she just has a tooth problem. Here's some antibiotics. Well, we brought her home, and that summer was like a really hot, 110 degrees every day. And then a couple days later, my mom called and said, I don't know, we let her out to go to the bathroom, and we can't find her. We've driven all over the place, because she never went anywhere. And if she did, she knew how to get home.
Right.
But then we never found her. And I've been such a crazy dog fanatic my whole life, but I never really heard this before. But I heard it when I was looking everywhere for her. They said, yeah, a lot of times older dogs just go off and die. And I guess that's what she did, because we called everywhere, we searched everywhere, couldn't find her.
Wow.
But that was my first dog, and she taught me a lot of stuff, because like I said, I think she was a pit bull mix, definitely, because she I have to keep her on a tie out when we let her outside. And my dad let her out like at 5 a.m. He was getting ready to do stuff, and I could hear it in my bedroom. I woke up to a fight, and I looked out the window, and my dad's got a rake or something. He's beating something. And I came, got dressed and came out, and he's like, yeah, the other dog got away. But he said, I don't know, this crazy dog, she would not let go of them. And they're twice as big as her, and they're biting her in the back and everything. She just wouldn't let go.
Wow.
And he said, I had more trouble with trying to get her to let go of them than them let go of her. So, yeah, and I had plenty of things like that. She used to follow me to the park, and we lived close to this big park with a big lake, and everybody was fishing, kids would be fishing. And she'd jump in and just chase the ducks and try to kill the ducks. And everybody be like, hey, that dog's messing up my fishing. Is that your dog? And I'd be like, nope, that's not my dog. I'd just keep walking, and then eventually she'd catch up with me. But, yeah, she did a lot of stuff like that. So I was crazy about dogs from about 5 years of age. I used to follow stray dogs when we'd go to my grandma's. In the city. I'd walk through alleyways just to look at people's crazy dogs and stuff. I could tell you every breed, just about every book there was that I could find on dogs. I read it. And so I developed into a Doberman fanatic from 11 or 12. I used to go to shows if I could get my dad to just drop me off at a dog show. I used to go to the specialty shows. I used to subscribe to Doberman Quarterly, Doberman World. Anyway, I hated, actually, it was all show dog stuff. And I kind of grew to hate dog show people and breeders. Not hate them, I just thought they were nuts, which they are. And because I'd go to these shows in the 70s, the Doberman was it. And you go to shows, and there were like people that were millionaires and people that were like dirt poor, and women that had all this gold jewelry that had Doberman head earrings and Doberman man. They just looked crazy. Some of them were dressed like they're going to a ball or something.
Right.
And their dog would win, and you'd see all these women jumping up and down and crying and shaking as if, they won the World Series. So I grew up thinking, oh, my God. And I actually worked for a lady from about 14 to about 16, just cleaning her kennel. She was a wealthy housewife. Her husband was like some big district attorney in St. Louis, and she had a kennel of like 10 or 15 Dobermans. They're all show dogs. And she, I didn't understand as a kid. I don't know if she put the dogs down or if she sold them, or I really don't know. She didn't tell me the truth. And but I figured some of them she put down. And I thought she was just a horrible person after that. I wouldn't have worked for her. I didn't want anything to do with her.
Right.
So I didn't really, as a kid, I just didn't understand. And I still don't understand some of that stuff. But I just thought dog breeders were pretty crazy. And then I used to own a restaurant, and I opened my restaurant when I was pretty young. I was like 25. And by the time I was about 32, I realized, man, I just work all the time. I was working 6-7 days a week. Even if I took 2 days off, if I could, my mind was always at the restaurant because, it's a small business. There's not a huge profit margin, but you got to rely on minimum wage workers and stuff. So It just was too much. I thought, this isn't the lifestyle for me. I want to have some kind of a hobby. So I bought my first house, and I decided I had a Doberman, and I had some little mutt cattle dogs that I found. And then I thought, I knew about these American Bulldogs from a dog book I bought called The World of Fighting Dogs back in the 80s. And I always loved the Bulldog, English Bulldogs and stuff. When I read about them, though, I was like, wow, they just have all these health problems. And at first I thought, as a kid, oh, yeah, the little short dogs, they got wrinkles on their face so they can keep the blood out of their eyes, which is what this one book I had called the C. Bailey Haynes, a big book on Bulldogs. They said all that kind of stuff, which then I started learning, hey, that's probably not true. That's probably just like a marketing thing. And English Bulldog is bred on mutations, so they tend to have some physical problems sometimes. But so anyway, I got my first one in 1988, but I never had any intention to ever breed dogs or anything. I just wanted a pet, and I got her from somebody, I guess, in the back of Dog World, and I didn't get papers, or if I did, I just threw them away. I don't remember. Anyway, she was like a white dog with pink eyelids and a pink nose, and she was cowhocked, and she was nasty. Like, once she got to be about 5 months old, she tried to beat up my cattle dog, and then she busted the pickets in my fence and grabbed the neighbor's Cocker Spaniel, and it cost me like $450. So I thought, wow, this dog's just too crazy, and she's ugly as and she was just, I probably would have appreciated her more now because she had a lot of working drive, but I gave her to a guy that owned a farm, and he was semi-retired, and as far as I know, she lived her life out there. Then I decided to sell my restaurant, so I did. It took a couple years, and when I did, I thought, wow, I have time. I'm going to get a really good American Bulldog. So I contacted Mr. Johnson. At that time, he told me all the grandiose stories, and that he produced 150-pound dogs. And if I wanted the bigger dog, bigger than 120-pound ones, they were $1,500. If I wanted the regular dog, it was $1,000. So I sent him a deposit, and I waited and waited. He'd have puppies, but there was a waiting list before me. Or then I had a puppy, and then it died. That happened like 5 times. And so I think he was even getting frustrated trying to get me a dog. He was older, and his idea was, the bitch has the puppies in the little whelping hut that they build, and whatever walks out of there at 5 weeks, he'll sell. He says he never did anything. I believe he didn't do anything. I'm not sure he wormed his puppies. But his dogs, would die quite often too. Like I used to start visiting them. I went with a guy from Illinois here. We drove down. The first time I ever went to Mr. Johnson's, I was like, oh man, I cannot wait. He's the biggest breeder, and he's got these famous dogs in dog world. Well, I got there and it was like, wow, it wasn't a big plantation. It wasn't a very beautiful setup. And he had a lot of yards and big dogs that would just run up and down the fence and bark. And some of them are just not breedable as far as I was concerned. And some were really awesome. And I'd visit him all the time. We used to cut his grass sometimes if we got there and we had time. Because he had problems walking, like with his knees, I think. Evidently, he worked his whole life on concrete and in a carpet factory. And his wife took care of the dogs mainly, but she was a little tiny lady too, so she couldn't do a lot of the stuff. So just from my time going to visit him, I realized, from one visit to the next, 6 months, 8 months, you'd see dogs grow up, and then you'd see young dogs are gone. It's like, what happened to him? Oh, he got hit by lightning, or he this and that. So eventually he told me about a kid. Well, he's about my age, but back then he called him a kid, mm-hmm. that produced a litter, and they were 12 weeks old. He hadn't sold any, and they're off of mainly his dogs. They were off a dog called Peeler's Chief, bred to a female called Dallas, and Dallas was from a famous dog at the time called Gator Red, bred to 100% Johnson dog. So it was a 7/8 Johnson dog, 1/8 Painter dog. So I got this dog. I call him Boomer. His registered name was Rebel Machines Explosion. And he got huge. I mean, huge. When I picked him up, he was like 14 weeks old. I picked him up from the airport. He's so big, his head was rubbing on the top of the crate.
Wow. And
I guess the crate had been sitting, unmade, full of dirt and dust. So the top of his head was like black. I'm like, what the hell? And his bone was huge. He was just gigantic. When he got to be 6 months old or 6.5 months old, he was 97 pounds. And when he was done growing, he was 148 pounds. And he was so tall, I was kind of embarrassed because I used to have a plastic patio table, and I was doing something, so I was at eye level with the patio table, and he walked by it, and it hit right at the top, or at the bottom of his, or at the top of his withers, at the bottom of his neck. So I measured that thing, and it was 29 inches.
Wow.
Well, that's huge compared to a lot of them. But I used to be embarrassed. I'd say he's 28.5 inches at those withers. But a lot of people back then, everything was the weight and the size. Like Dog World magazine, they would advertise, Mr. Johnson had a dog called Elrod. It said 150 pounds. Everything was 150 pounds, 140 pounds. Mr. Johnson claimed he had a dog called King's Bruiser Bow the 6th, or the 5th or the 6th, I can't remember anymore, but he said he was over 170 pounds, which I'm not sure. I think Mr. Johnson figured out that the bigger the dogs were, the more money people would pay. Mm-hmm. And that was his main goal there for a while. He always picked the biggest puppy. Mm-hmm. He'd tell us things. I don't know if he was pulling our leg or just, being from Georgia and I'm from Missouri, if he thought we were just dumb Yankees, and he'd tell us crazy stories, but he'd tell us the craziest stuff. He told me once that one of his best Colette females, Colettes were the bigger females, he said she was going to be 160, but he said one night he saw a big light in the backyard, and the UFO took her. So, and I'm not the only one he told that to either.
Yeah,
he told me that this other dog he had, Machine Buckaroo, I guess he was pretty big, and he said that the King of Spain bought him, and before he went, late one night he heard people talking, and he came out and he said, I peeked through the bushes, and it was buckaroo. He was speaking English. And I thought, oh, yeah, well, my dog Boomer, if a female's in heat or something, he gets all making these gurgly noises.
Yeah.
It sounds like he's talking. He goes, no, he was speaking the Queen's English. So I don't know if he said that stuff because he just he thought it was funny to fool a Yankee or something, or if it was just he's getting old. I mean, he was close to 80 years old. Maybe he was losing it, but... So I had that huge dog Boomer, and nobody believed my dog was that big because, like I said, everybody lied about the size. At 11 months, I took him to a show in Tennessee, and people were like, how big is he? And I said, I took him to the vet. He was 125. Of course, back then, he was my first American Bulldog I kept, so I would take him to the vet and weigh him all the time. And so a lot of people didn't believe me, and they hung a scale from a basketball hoop and weighed him. Sure enough, he was 125. And he ended up to be about 148 pounds. So I've gotten two other females eventually. One I got as a stud fee on Boomer. She ended up to be the female that I went forward with a lot more. The other one I bought, her name was Red Hot Reba. She had a great temperament, but she wasn't structurally as nice. Those two were both a little better than 7/8 Johnson. Anyway, I bred to a big, huge dog called Tyson that was pretty well known back then. And that's kind of where I got my start. Early on, I was into big, and of course I was talking to Mr. Johnson. He was telling me all these stories about big, huge American Bulldogs and how fantastic and athletic they are, and how they're gamer than pit bulls and all this stuff. But I like my big dog, and I like Tyson, who was a 135-pound big American Bulldog. He looked like he had a giant English Bulldog head and a thick, pretty nice body. Tyson was bred to a lot of hybrid, or a lot of standard type or hybrid American Bulldogs in California. So his blood's in a lot of standard dogs and show dogs. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's how I got my start. I started out kind of wanting a big, not necessarily a 140-pound dog, but 110 to 115-pound dog. And since I grew up around Dobermans and I'd go to shows, and there's a bad structured Doberman is usually better structured than most dogs. I couldn't get over how bad the structure was on these dogs. Back then, most of the people didn't know what cowhocked was. And I used to have people tell me, well, that's the way an American Bulldog is supposed to be built. They're supposed to turn out their back legs in the back. Or if they lacked angulation, they said, no, that's how a Bulldog's supposed to be, because when they're pushing up against a wild boar, they need to lock their back legs. Things have changed a lot. The dogs have gotten a lot better structure, but that's what I mainly bred for: size, structure, temperament. Temperament was another thing we had some trouble with, because Mr. Johnson, he sold them quite a bit as a protection dog, and he didn't test his dogs or train them or do anything with them. And if he got one, he got a lot of dogs returned that were just nasty, like for no reason, want to kill people or want to bite somebody. They're like fear biter type dogs, but to him, that meant that they were being protective and all this stuff. And so he had several. He had that dog Elrod, came to him, and I saw Elrod once, and he was big. He was probably at least 135, and he wasn't a bad-looking dog. He was more Mastiffy than Bulldog, but he used to tell me, now don't stare at him, and if you go up to his fence, just baby talk to him. So, and they were weird. They liked kids and women, but if you're a grown man, and what it was is I think they sensed any kind of apprehension, and if that makes them uneasy, they're insecure with themselves, and they just act civilly. They just fire up and bark, and it's mainly a fearful thing. Of course, dogs that are civil, they have a little bit of fear in them, even though, but a dog that bites you in fear is biting very hard. They can hurt you. So
right.
A lot of these breeds that are good for that kind of work, for guard work and stuff, do have a little bit of civil drive. A lot of dogs that are really confident and sure of themselves, they may not bite a guy no matter what. They may not have any, they just have programmed to bite a human being. So you got to have a little bit of that civil drive to have a good guard dog or watchdog or whatever you want. But Mr. Johnson bred those, so I had a lot of stuff early on that was psycho like that. And it was weird because they'd reach a certain age, and then I had a lady from Germany that bought a dog for me, Sabina, and she used to drive me crazy. She'd call me and say, "Oh, Bubba's 130 pounds," and I'm like, "Whoa, no way. I mean, how could he be 130 pounds? He should be maybe 110. She goes, "Oh, I know, he's so fat. My vet says I have to take weight off of him. He's going to hurt his knees." I said, "Well, why don't you stop feeding him so much?" She goes, "Oh, I can't help it. I have little kids, and he's always taking food. They're throwing food on the floor, and he eats it." I'm like, "Well," and then she called me back and said, "He won't let my husband sit on the couch." And I said, "Well, what do you mean he won't let him sit on the couch?" She goes, "Oh, he growls at him, and he'll snap at him if he tries to move him." I said, "Yeah, well, you shouldn't let a dog like that sit on the couch or on the bed." She says, "Oh, we have to lock our doors at night so he doesn't come into our bedroom. He sleeps with my daughter." And I'm like, "What?" She goes, "Yeah, we used to let him sleep on the bed, and then he'd take up all the room, and we'd be falling on the ground, and you can't move him, and he'll bite you." And I'm like, "Oh, my God." She goes, "Well, what do I do? He doesn't like my father-in-law either." I said, "Well, put a choke collar on him and a long leash, and the minute he growls at somebody, yank him off that couch." And she's like, "I would never do that. Oh, my God, I would never do that." So, and then they were at Fort Leonard Wood here in Missouri. He was in the military. She called me back years later crying and saying, "Could you take Bubba for 4 years?" I'm like, "What?" She said, "Could you take our Bubba for 4 years? We're going back to Germany, and Vito, I know my country, they'll put him down. They'll give him a death injection. If they test him and he growls, that's it. They'll put him down." And I'm like, "I can't. There's no way I can take care of your dog for 4 years, especially if he's crazy like that." So I've had to weed through that kind of temperament. If anything, nowadays my dogs are less suspicious and a little more naturally loving of just everybody they meet that comes and finds. They'll defend their territory if somebody strange comes up, but I don't care for bulldogs that just want to bite somebody for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
But I bred for size for years, and then I got a female off of Tyson, bred to 100% Johnson dog, a guy named Jeff Daly has, called Mustang Sally. And she was a female I called Braudzilla. And she was a more compact dog with very low body fat and just muscle. I mean, she could just sit around all day and just have muscle definition. I love that. And then I sold a dog to a guy who introduced me to this dog that was in Illinois called Mufasa. Nobody knew who he was at the time, and he was about the same age as my dog, Braudzilla. And he sent me a videotape of the dog, and I never thought it was going to be anything, because people used to always do that. They'd say, "Oh, I got a great male," and they send me the thing, and I'm like, "Oh my God, he's not really that nice." But this dog turned out to be really nice. He looked like my dog, Braudzilla, only a male version. And he was a smaller, more compact, low body fat, super muscular dog. And so then my direction changed. Everything was, I got to breed Mufasa to Braudzilla. Both their hips checked out really good. They're both very similar. She was like the female version of him. But as fate had it, I tried and tried. I drove, took off work, did all kinds of stuff, progesterone tested her, spent a fortune. And he could not tie her. I don't know what the deal was. If she was too manly for him, he was just turned off, because he tied other females, but he could never tie her. So we had to do AIs, and every time I did an AI, it would not take with her. So I was going on, she was about 4 years old almost, and never had a litter of puppies, and she was the first bully champion American Bulldog that I know of. There's an organization called the ABNA, and she was the first one that was registered as a champion. And Mufasa was like the third champion. And like I said, I wanted to breed them together, and then finally I'm like, this is never going to happen. So I bred her to her nephew, and then my goal was to breed their kids, their offspring together, which is what I did. And that got me pretty well known. I produced some pretty famous dogs that ended up all over the world. But along that time, I'd sold a dog to some people in Virginia. It was just a nice family, and the dog was super, super beautiful, bully, everything you wanted in a dog. And we became pretty good friends. They'd send me pictures and tell me about all the things the dog was doing. Well, they'd leave for work in the morning and just put him out in the backyard, and he was fine. And he was about 3 years old. They went to work. It was a spring day. It wasn't summer. But it was, came up kind of hot. And anyway, the neighbor had a garage that was up against their property line, and they didn't know it, but they had a crew of roofers ripping the roof off and putting a new roof on that garage. So this dog went nuts all day barking at these guys that were on his territory. Well, he overheated and died, and their kids came home from school, walked in the backyard, and found this dead dog that overheated with blood coming out of his mouth. And it hadn't really affected me too much at that point. It hadn't really sunk in how bad the breathing was with American Bulldogs, because at that time I lived in town. I had a big yard. I built a little kennel house off the side of my garage that was heated and air conditioned. And I only had 7 or 8 dogs at tops. And so they all lived in air conditioning. Mm-hmm. They weren't like outdoor dogs. And I didn't do anything besides take them for walks in the park, or I hadn't done bite work or caught hogs or done anything with my dogs at that point. But every year, every summer, all these famous dogs would die. Some people would tell the truth and say, yeah, he overheated. Some people are like, oh, no, he got struck by lightning, or he had an allergic reaction to something, or whatever. But I started realizing that all these dogs have a degree of palate problems, breathings like the English Bulldog. Mr. Johnson admitted to using some dogs that David Levitt first bred an English Bulldog to an American Bulldog. And as it turns out now, we know he gave the whole litter, everything he didn't keep, he just gave it to Mr. Johnson. And he started, he calls them 2 different lines, but he called the female Sugar Doll, and he called the other ones Machine Line. And what most people don't realize is those dogs were at sometimes 50% to 25% English Bulldog. And he line bred on it. Mm-hmm. So, the NKC used to have what they call the 7/8 rule, that if you wanted to outcross a different breed into your bloodline, you had to breed back to a registered American Bulldog till it was 7/8 or less that blood. Mm-hmm. And you mention it to some American Bulldog people nowadays, and they just flip their lid. Oh my God, that's horrible! They should never let any other breed into the gene pool. Otherwise, we don't have a pure breed. Well, Mr. Johnson, he got a half and half and registered them as American Bulldogs and line bred off of it. So today, all of these bully American Bulldogs are a minimum of 25% West Champs High Hopes, that dog that they crossed in. Now, I can guarantee you that isn't the only English Bulldog that's been crossed in. Mm-hmm. I even know from old timers, old people that had this type of dog in the United States, that we'd ask them, hey, where did these dogs come from? How were they derived? And they'll talk, yeah, sometimes they'd put, a pit bull in there. They claim they'd always been here, which I'm sure they were. They were like a catch-weight pit bull. When those dogs first came to the United States, they didn't call them pit bulls. They just called them bulldogs. Mm-hmm. And the people that fought the dogs if they had a bigger one that wasn't his game, they'd either put it down or they'd give it away to a rancher or a hog hunter. Well, a hog hunter would love it, a 50-pound, 60, 70-pound pit bull. Or if it's a mix, they don't care. They really don't care what it is. They bred basically for purpose. If they had I know that because today in 2020, I deal with hog hunters, and they're not dog breeders, and they don't care about paperwork or money. They only care about catching hogs, and whatever animal they can work with that makes it easy for them is great. If it catches and it works, it's pure. It's pure to them. I gave a female to a hog hunter that I'm really good friends with now. He called her Grace. And he bragged about how great Grace was. I actually went on a hog hunt with her, and I didn't think she was so great because she would get kind of aggressive, like she was wanting to try to kill a pig, which, if you're ever on a hunt with wild boar, especially if they're 175 pounds or bigger, a 70-pound bulldog is not going to, if they're trying to kill the hog, to me, that's not a really good catch dog. But anyway, he loved her because she would jump on anything. And once one dog jumps on, the bay dogs have the courage to grab. And the more dogs you got grabbing one of those pigs before you have to kill it, the better for the hunter. It's safer. So anyway, he's like, I want to breed Grace. And I'm like, okay, great. Who do you want to breed her to? Oh, I'm going to breed her to Bozo. And I'm like, what? Well, who's that? Oh, my friend. It's my friend's dog. I said, oh, well, what bloodline is it? Who's it? He goes, bloodline? No, he's a great catch dog. He's half Weimaraner, quarter pit bull, and, Catahoula. Why would you want to do that? He said, because he's an excellent catch dog, and she's a nice catch dog. That's all they care about. If you go hunting with a lot of, serious hog hunters, their little tribe of dogs, they're bay dogs, and if they go through the whole thing, very few of the dogs are purebred.
Yep.
There are some amount of hunters that swear by a black-mouthed cur or a walker hound or a plot hound or something like that, but they're not prejudiced if it's got 25% beagle in it and it still works good. They don't care.
Right.
All they care about is the work. So that's kind of how the American Bulldog came around, because in the 1800s, early 1900s, people in the cities, more well-to-do people may have been like show dog people, but the people that use these dogs to hunt and catch and herd cattle and push cattle, they were not, these weren't pleasure animals. These were dogs that, brought home the bacon. They helped them survive. So they didn't care about papers, nothing. Their mindset was like dog people were going back thousands of years. You know what a pure bulldog is a bulldog that catches bulls. It's not paperwork, and it's not some snooty idea of what's pure. So that's pretty much what's going on. The old timers had always told us that, every once in a while they'll put a pure English. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like an English bulldog? Like, yeah. Well, back in the 20s, the English bulldog was different. It was a sour bug, but it had some leg to it. And I imagine they had to breed natural and whelp natural. Even wealthy people, in the city and stuff, if you told them, hey, we're going to have a C-section, they'd be like, what are you talking about? Or we're going to AI a dog. They're like, huh? So the dogs were a little different, but there's still, I'm sure, a lot of that English bulldog was. And there's other stuff in the dogs too. Like I said, the guys just bred whatever worked. And then you had people that bred just purely for a dog to have in their pickup truck. So if you got a guy that's like, hey, so-and-so's got a big old Great Dane Bulldog mix, we'll put that in there and I'll have a big old dog for my pickup.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way the breed developed. But ever since Mr. Johnson produced the bullier-looking dogs off that English Bulldog cross, I'd say about 90% of the American Bulldogs that are bred today are what they call the bully type, and they have some breathing issues. So, but for the last 17 years, I bet, I've been trying to clean up the breathing and to actually make the dogs where they can function the way the written standard describes them in a traditional way. So I've had to outcross to a lot of standard dogs. And, the first one I did was this blood called Man of War. And there's one dog that's pretty well known in there called Vito Red. And a lot of people have just, with the Johnson dog, and say, oh, that just looks like a giant pit bull. Which, I don't think they were a pure pit bull. It was, probably had more pit bull than, or less English bulldog than a Johnson dog. Mm-hmm. But back then, I didn't know any better. Of course, everybody starts out breeding dogs. They know everything. Nobody can tell them anything. Mm-hmm. And they can just look at pictures and figure out what to breed, because it's all about the way they look. Well, that's the way I thought back then. I thought, I'll just breed to the standard dog, and then I'll breed back to my Johnson blood, and I'll have the look I want, but all of a sudden, all that breathing stuff will disappear. So I tried it at first, didn't work. I tried another standard dog. I bought a dog from a guy in New York, upstate New York, called Gail Raponi. It was a black and white female called Dinah. I used her and did the same thing, bred back to my stuff to keep the look, and it was almost like not doing anything really. I'd get some that would breathe good, and I'd get some that didn't breathe good. And probably about 8 years ago, I started getting some results. I don't know if it was just from outcrossing or if it was from so many generations of selecting on breathing, on cleaner pallets, but I used to start testing my dogs in the heat. I'd have a garden hose going, and I'd get them on a flirt pole or whatever they like to do, and I'd push them to the point where they're going to overheat. And the dogs that could recover on their own and wouldn't have any issues except, panting and being tired, those I'd breed. The ones that would vapor lock and I'd have to pull out a hose to keep them from getting overheated, those I wouldn't breed. So a lot of people started accusing me of crossing in all kinds of stuff. Early on, I was really into hip x-rays and doing the pen hip evaluation, and I produced a lot of dogs with pretty good hips. And like I said, Braudzilla, that dog was really muscular, and I inbred her 3 times, and then I outcrossed her, and then I line bred that back throughout with using the fossa blood. She was also real muscular and had tight hips. And so I get dogs with crazy muscle and tight skin. It's a little different looking than Johnson or Scott dogs. And like I said, I outcrossed a Man of War. The Man of War dogs had a lot of color. Some of them are almost solid red or solid brindle. And then I outcrossed to Gail Raponi's dog, which is kind of the same bloodline as Aspen Rare. And they use Heinz dogs that are or hog-catching type dogs crossed to Scott, and a dog called Aslan. Aslan's a real controversial dog, too. Some people say, oh, he was an oldie mixed American Bulldog cross, which I'm not sure. There's no evidence of that. But his father, I think, this is back in the 90s. His father's pedigree was pretty much made up or questionable. Anyway, he was a great dog, but he had black. He produced black that wasn't brindle, flat black. So I got the black, and I didn't try to, but I started producing really good dogs that were like heavy colored black. And I produced about 3 generations of them, and I didn't show them a lot to anybody just because they had more color than Johnson dogs normally do. And but then I did a breeding with this male I produced called BMJ to a female I had called Monella. Monella was a decent dog. She was black, like a tuxedo black, I'd call it. And BMJ was white with a fawn or red patch on his face and a spot on his back. And so I thought, oh, he'll break up the color, no problem. And so they had 7 puppies. The 2 white ones were born dead. There was 2 solid red and 3 blacks, and they all had too much color on them. So at the time, I was like, I'm just going to keep a male and a female and put the rest in pet homes, just sell them to pet people. But the guy that owned BMJ's a dog I produced, and he owned the dog, and he was all excited, I guess, because that was his first litter and off of BMJ. And he was like talking to me into just, let's place them out with people and we can keep track of them and use them as we need to. Like, okay, fine, let's do that. Well, they turned out to be incredible dogs. This dog called Huggy, just the structure and muscle was incredible. And then Huggy produced a dog called Gaucho. He championed out. His aunt, Gracie, she's a black dog. She was the first black bully champion. And it started a craze for the black dogs, just because they were structured really good. But when you get a black shiny coat and they have muscle like that, it shows every fiber, every cut of their muscle, and it just really stands out. Like bodybuilders, if you see professional bodybuilders, they get so tan, they look, crazy. They just look like somebody poured shoe polish all over them. And They do that, and they grease themselves up, and they do that because it shows every fiber and cut of their muscle. So anyway, nowadays there's a big craze. There's a lot of people that love black dogs, heavy colored dogs, black dogs, and you'll see it's a lot more mainstream now than it used to be. But those dogs still didn't breathe as great as I'd like to. That was like 2006, 2008. So anyway, nowadays my dogs breathe a lot better. I've outcrossed more standard dogs, and I'm pretty much done. I've got to the point where I'm pretty much now making full circle. I'm starting to just select for looks and size and little cosmetic stuff, and trying to concentrate with the blood I'm using now, because I produced a lot of dogs that function as catch dogs here in Missouri and Texas and in Oklahoma, and I'm pretty much sticking to that same gene pool. And I've got a way healthier dog than I did when I started, better temperament, and most of them can actually do the job that the historical depiction of American Bulldogs stated in all the books, and even Mr. Johnson used to talk about, and Alan Scott talks about, being able to be a catch dog that works day in, day out, no matter how hot it is outside, and can come home and play with your kids in the front yard. So that's about where I'm at now. It's, like I said, it's been quite a learning experience, because there's no books that tell you how to do any of this stuff. Even though a lot of people think they read a book written by certain people and, doctor so-and-so, and you find out they're a doctor of, like, education, and they've never bred a litter of dogs. They've only showed quiche hounds or something like that. So it's hard to learn. There's nobody out there that tells you do this or do that. I don't think there's really a combination. You got to kind of do it and see what happens. You can't do it off a piece of paper. So now in 2020, I realized that I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I realized that, there was a lot more knowledge to gain than I thought. I thought when I got into it that, hey, you know what, I'm going to straighten out the cow hocks, and I'm going to breed a prettier, nicer looking dog with a huge head and just awesome. And, I'm sure I see younger guys, they're doing the same thing. And, I judge dog shows sometimes, and I have people, I try to tell them certain things, and you can tell that old saying that when the student's ready, the teacher will come. That's kind of how it is. If you're not receptive to learn something, you just don't have the consciousness for it, you're not going to learn it. So experience and getting out there and doing it is the only thing that really, does it. And there's people that have done it for longer than me that I still don't think they're getting it, but they're, in their mind, they have a different goal. They're not out to try to change and improve the breed for breathing or working ability. They're just whatever their little goals are. That's what they're trying to do.